Good afternoon. My name is Mike Pelletier, and this is the Unvarnished Truth. This is my first time doing this, so forgive me if I'm a little nervous. But I'm going to try to talk to you about important issues of the day and give you my perspective. I'm a retired lawyer living in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains in East Tennessee. Behind me, you see some Japanese swords, which were a gift from my son some years ago, and two motorcycle helmets that I occasionally use. I'm an avid motorcyclist. Uh, as the election approaches this fall, a lot of people have been talking about the poor quality of the candidates and the amount of anger across the world, uh, in our country and in the UK, for example, in the Brexit vote that is being displayed by voters throughout the world. Anger with government. Let me just and a lot of issues are being discussed, and they're all important issues. Uh, uh, Immigration, jobs, radical Islam, terrorism, what have you. But I think that uh, as is often the true in my personal life, the anger is a mask for fear. And the fear stems from our astonishing national debt. A couple of years ago, I read it currently stands at $19.5 trillion. And the Congressional Budget Office guesstimates it'll be, close to 30 trillion in a matter of years. Um, a few years ago, I read a book by William Simon, who was Secretary of the Treasury under Ford, and he expressed regret. I think he was writing in the mid to late 1970s, writing his memoir, that that they had not done enough to reduce the national debt, which at that time was $700 billion, and uh, Secretary Simon was lamenting that fact. I would be so grateful today for a national debt of $700 billion that I can't even begin to explain it. Our debt levels are simply astonishing. Judge Andrew Napolitano from Fox News a couple of years ago pointed out that $1 trillion could reach to the sun. And if you do the math, he's exactly right. Dollar bills laid side by side, a trillion of them, travels about 100 million miles, which is about the distance to the sun. The sun is 93 million miles away. Do the math yourself. It's astounding. $1 trillion could reach the sun, and we owe 19 plus trillion dollars. What is that? 9.5 round trips to the sun in dollar bills. I mean, it is simply astonishing. Uh, and it's all being driven, and there's very little discussion about that on the campaign trail. Trump points it out once in a while that our debt is what it is, but then his solution is to cut taxes and grow the economy, and that will yield more tax revenue. But this is all pie in the sky. People lament the fact that our candidates are of such poor quality. But I think all the good people basically have their assets in Swiss bank accounts and have bought freeze dried food and own large quantities of guns because trouble is coming because of this national debt. Trump made an interesting point the other night at the first debate, which pundits say he lost, and that was that the Federal Reserve is highly politicized. I'll bet that just flew over a lot of people's heads, or they didn't pay much attention to it. But he's exactly right. I mean, keeping the interest rates as low as they have, has indeed floated the stock market, which has gone from a low of 6,000 during the Great Recession in 2008 or 2009 to what it is today, 18,000. I think it's an enormous bubble. If the stock market is so interest rate sensitive that whenever anybody in the Federal Reserve talks about an interest rate hike, the market plummets, and then when they take it back the next day or don't raise rates, the market goes back up. But I would suggest to you simply that the stock market is only half the bubble being created by the Fed, or half the political agenda that the Fed has. The other half is keeping our debt service as low as possible. When the interest rates are zero, we're paying very little in interest on the 19.5 trillion in debt. I mean, relatively speaking, we're paying $200 billion a year in debt service, which is twice the gross national budget in 1964, when the federal budget first crossed $100 billion. Well, now our interest payments alone are $200 billion. But if the Fed were to raise rates to their historic norms of 4 or 5%, our annual interest payments would go to $1 trillion a year. The federal budget is only about 4.5 trillion, give or take. So we're talking 25% of the budget would be interest payments. This would be catastrophic. So Trump's right. The Fed is playing politics. It's inflating the stock market and deflating our debt service. But if our debt service ever got real, we'd be crunched. So the first order of business for any new president has to be to balance the budget. We're addicted to debt. The first order of business has to be to balance the budget in year one. No more 10-year plans. Year one, balance the budget with or without a balanced budget amendment, which is just crucial. So how did we get here? Well, to put it in very simple terms, the national debt, as I said, was $700 billion in the mid to late 1970s, and by the time Bill Clinton, finished his term of office, I think it had climbed through Ronald Reagan, Bush Sr., and Bill Clinton. It had not climbed much. It was not at our current catastrophic levels, but it was $4 or $5 trillion in those 10 or 15, 20 years. And then, Bush Jr., jacked it up to about 10 trillion, fighting two wars and what have you through the 2000s. And now President Obama has virtually doubled the national debt. He's added $9.5 trillion in debt since he came into office 7+ years ago. It's ludicrous that he takes credit for having reduced the deficit. His first deficit, which is the annual budget deficit, which is then added to the national debt, his first budget deficit was $1.5 trillion, which is astronomical. Largest budget deficit by far in the history of the republic. And he is, the deficits are now, annual deficits are now, quote unquote, down to $500 to $600 trillion. And Obama's trying to take credit for that, for reducing the deficit. The current deficit of $600 billion is more than Bush ever incurred in his 8 years in office on an annual basis. So we keep running these deficits on an annual basis, and they keep getting added to the national debt. And here we are in 2016 at 19.5 trillion. I was just checking the numbers from the Congressional Budget Office, and people say that this is all driven by entitlements, and they're absolutely right. The budget deficit for this year is projected to be about $580 billion. The Medicare deficit for this year is projected to be $500+ billion. Social Security is about break even now. In 10 years, the Congressional Budget Office says it's going to be running a deficit of about $400 billion. And Medicare will be at a deficit of $1.6 trillion. So in 10 years, those two programs are going to be generating deficits of $2 trillion a year annually. I mean, this is just astronomical. And I would suggest to you that what has happened, speaking in very general terms, what has happened is that Republicans have voted for tax decreases or held the line on taxes, no tax increases, and Democrats continue to increase spending. So you have increased spending, no increases or decreases in taxes, and everybody gets reelected because Republicans are delivering on their promises, no new taxes, and Democrats are delivering on their promises, no decreases in spending, continue to expand federal programs and federal spending, and the result is a runaway, astronomical debt and deficit situation, which is simply unsustainable. So the first thing we have to do is balance the budget in year one. And that's going to be very hard to do. It's very hard to cut spending in Washington. So my suggestion is, and I'm not sure yet what the revenue impact would be, but right now, Social Security only applies to about the first $100,000 of a person's income. They take out 6%, Social Security payroll tax, Social Security tax, and the employer has to match that. But it's only on the first, I think the figure is $112,000 now. So why not lift that cap altogether so that the highest paid CEO, whatever he's making, I don't know, 25 million, 100 million, who knows what these guys are making, and gals now, just lift the cap and have all that money pouring into the coffers, which can be used to shore up Social Security, subsidize Medicaid, and fund operating deficits of the federal government. So that's one suggestion. But the unvarnished truth is that we are in an unsustainable debt situation, which cannot continue, or the results are potentially catastrophic. If our debt service goes to $1 trillion, and if we don't do anything to address Medicare and Social Security, if we don't do anything to address these deficits, we're going to have to cut vital federal programs. Food stamps, Social Security disability, Social Security, Medicare, and people are going to be very unhappy, and some very, very unhappy people are going to take to the streets, and some of those people are going to take to the streets with guns, and we're going to have civil unrest in this country if we don't address this situation. And that's why the smart people, that's why we're left with Trump and Clinton, and that's why the smart people are heading for the hills. So that's the unvarnished truth for today, and the truth of the matter is we are in an unsustainable debt and deficit situation, and we've got to do something about it. The next president's got to do something about it, whether it's Clinton or Trump. And frankly, I hope it's Trump. Despite his many peccadillos, I'll be voting for him, and I hope you do too. If Clinton is elected and she's like Obama, as she says she's going to be, and we add another $10 trillion in debt to go to $30 trillion, I mean, you're talking about half the money in the entire world. We're approaching, if we haven't already gone past the point of no return, we're approaching it rapidly. Trump says it's $24 trillion or so. I really don't know what the breaking point is, but at some point, we're going to be in a very, not a problematic situation. We're going to be in a dangerous situation. We got to do something about that fast. So that's all from here. Thanks for listening, and hope you'll tune in next time.